What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the NRW. I'm your host, Rob Medina, and I thank you all very much for joining me here today because today I'm going to be reviewing the movie Boon. So, to give a bit of a backstory about my anticipation for this film, I had the opportunity to speak with Jason Starn and Derek Presley. Derek Presley is the writer and director of Boon along with Redstone and Whitetail, and I'll get into more about that for those who are not aware. And Jason Starn is the producer of all three of those films, and I believe Derek Presley is also producing all the films as well too through their production company, Muscular Puppy. The first film that they had done under that production company is a film called Whitetail, which I checked out last year, and I also reviewed here for the channel. And I'll make sure to have the iCard for you guys to check out. I also recommend to say for you guys to check out Whitetail as well too, because it really is a good film. So my review on that movie was that it was a rather positive review of the film, and I really did enjoy the film. I had some minor issues with the film, but it wasn't anything that took away from my enjoyment of the movie. In fact, the positives certainly outweighed the negatives for me, which the negatives weren't really that much for me. It was just minor little things. That was just my personal preference, if you will. But with Redstone, on the other hand, which is another film I was anticipating that they were releasing in December of last year, I checked out that movie and I didn't like it that much. I didn't think it was nowhere near as good as Whitetail, which Redstone is not a terrible movie by any means, but it just wasn't a film that I really did enjoy as much as I thought I would. But there were a lot of wonderful elements about the film that I did enjoy about it, especially with the story and a lot of the characters, especially the character that Neil McDonough plays in Boon. But I had my conversation with both Jason and Derek and telling them how I felt about the film, and they were nothing but gracious to me the entire time of the conversation. We had a really good conversation on my show, You're So Cool with Rob Medina, which I also make sure you guys will be able to click on to check out if you haven't done so already. Really good conversation, and you get to learn a lot about these gentlemen, about who they are as individuals, which I think you guys will appreciate and hopefully will encourage you to check out their films. So, with my anticipation with Boon, I really believed that the things that I felt like didn't work, at least for me, in Redstone, that they would improve upon in Boon. And I'm happy to say that I really did enjoy this film. I will admit, though, that I do think that Whitetail is the superior movie out of all the three films they produced so far, but Boon is actually an enjoyable film for me personally. So I will get into a little bit of the plot synopsis. We won't get into any spoilers here, even though the movie came out last week, but there's still a lot of elements I think that is better to left to be unsaid for you to discover as the story progresses along the way. Then, of course, I'll get into my positives, my negatives, and then my rating. The widow Catherine is trying to protect herself and her son from a local criminal organization. When Nick Boon and Catherine's life cross paths, they find themselves leaning on each other to protect everything that they stand for. And that right there is the film in a nutshell. So now, let's get into my positives. My first positive with this movie is that I felt like the story, the pacing, the overall film in itself was better than I felt like didn't necessarily work for me in Redstone. I'm gonna be making some slight comparisons to Redstone in this review because this movie is actually kind of more or less like a loose sequel to Redstone because the events that occur in this film take place after Redstone, and I think the movie does a pretty good job in kind of filling in the gaps for the audience to help them understand that there was a previous story that occurred, but you don't necessarily have to see the film, although I do encourage you guys to check out the film to really understand what's going on, because it is pretty much its own isolated story, which I appreciate about this film, but there is a connection to Redstone that is touched upon, but then it moves on with the story that occurs in the film. So I did appreciate that. But as far as the overall story is concerned, as I kind of mentioned before in the plot synopsis, that you're following the character of Boon, who is escaping from the events that occur in Redstone, and he was being followed, and he ended up killing a hitman that more or less was on his tail. And then I come to find out it's Jason Scott Lee, who I'm actually a fan of here. If I don't mean to start my positive here with a negative in this respect, but I am a big fan of Jason Scott Lee, and I thought he was going to be in the film much more, and I hope this doesn't ruin the film for you guys, but he dies in the very beginning of the film, and I was like, oh man, I would love to see him kind of be more or less like the main antagonist for Boon, where it looks like he could have been very much a formidable opponent for him. So I thought that was going to be kind of the case here, where we get introduction to who that guy is, who then later on will be kind of just being a part of the story to have more or less like a final face-off. Like, I really was expecting that, and right away I was like, oh man, he's dead. So I don't mean to start off with that negative here, my positive, but I had to say that out loud because I just remember thinking that was something I would have loved to see in the film. But despite that, though, it's important to notate that you get to see that the sins of his past are still catching up with him, despite the fact he's making every attempt to run away from it and start a whole new life, isolating himself so that way he doesn't affect anybody else around him, so no one else will get hurt in crossing his past. So that way there is peace from at least as much peace as he can gather from getting away from all the things he's done in his past. And then one thing about this character in Boon is that I do actually appreciate the fact that the character has a real motivation to just stop committing these horrific acts that he's done in the past. And he's a Catholic. In real life, Neil McDonough made no secret that he is a devout Catholic. So he definitely does infuse that into the story. And I'll be honest with you, there was a part of me that was wondering if there's like some sort of hidden, is there any ulterior motive for putting his religious beliefs into this character? And quite frankly, that is not the case at all, which is one thing I did respect about this movie, is that I'm not saying that you shouldn't be doing that, putting your religious belief or whatever beliefs you have in the film. I'm not one to tell people what to do in that respect, but the only reason why I was concerned about it because I just thought that was going to be more or less like the main focus. But in fact, that's just an added element to help tell the story of Boon in this film, that there is a motivation for him to want to break away from the bad lifestyle that he had lived before, that he just wants to start anew, basically be forgiven and hopefully be able to redeem himself in some way or shape or form, which he does have the opportunity to do in this movie in helping out Catherine and her son. So I thought that was handled quite well in my opinion. One other thing I want to point out about this film is that I felt like the pacing for this movie worked much better this time around. And the funny thing is that in Redstone, the movie is about 94 minutes long, somewhere around there, and this movie is around the same exact runtime. So when I saw the runtime before I saw the film, I remember thinking that is it going to have the same pacing issues that I thought didn't work well with Redstone? And I'm happy to say that was not the case at all. Although it does move rather quickly, not quickly to the point just getting point A to point B, like that. It's just taking its time, but doing it in a way that's not going to be, it's not going to overstay its welcome, if that makes any sense. And I thought that was handled quite well. I also came to notice too that Jason Starn, who's also the producer of this film, was the editor in this movie. I don't recall if he was editing Redstone, but I have a feeling that with him editing this movie, that he probably took notice about whatever pacing issues that occurred in Redstone, that it was handled better this time around here. I'm sure Derek had a lot to say in that as well too. So I felt like they probably have taken notes about what again didn't work in Redstone that they could improve in Boon in terms of the pacing, which I thought worked much better in this film. There are some slow moments here, but the slow moments that you have in this film gives you time for you to get to know the characters as individuals, to really understand their backstory without revealing too much, especially with the character Boon, but also getting enough to get a backstory about Catherine and her son and why they are entangled with this crime organization run by Fitzgerald, who's played by Tommy Flanagan, who I actually liked in the movie, along with his daughter-in-law in the film, played by Christina Ochoa, if I'm not mistaken. So I feel like that when it came to spending time with the characters in this film, it worked better for me personally. So I also want to highlight too that all the actors in this film, in my opinion, have done a really good job with their performances. I think everyone has done a phenomenal job in showcasing of what they're capable of pulling off. But here's another thing I want to point out too in respect to everyone's performance is that there is no gray area as far as who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. We all know exactly who they are, so there's no secret about that. So I appreciate the fact that it's really just what you see is what you get. And when you get to spend time with the henchman played by James Mario, who is a veteran actor in the industry, and I forgot the other actor who plays his more or less his partner. I'm sure I'll have the image for you guys to see who he is along with his name here, but I felt like when you get to spend time with the characters and truly get to see who they are in certain moments in the film, to when they start questioning certain people, when they're experiencing something that they don't like and they're expressing their frustrations or their concerns or whatever the case may be, like you have those moments done by these actors who are really good at conveying those emotional beats that I thought worked very effectively. One other thing I want to highlight too with regards to the film is the directing in this movie. In my opinion, I thought was handled better this time around than it was in Redstone. Derek Presley, in my opinion, is a very good director. I think he does a really good job in trying to tell a unique version of a certain genre. So in this case, it's more or less kind of like a Western, but the approach with his Western, his take on the Western genre, if you will, and I'm sure a lot of it has to do with Neil McDonough's influence with the overall story as well too. I really do appreciate that he is trying something different from something we've already seen before, but just adding his own unique flair to it, if you will. And I think he's done a really good job with that. And I think the cinematography for this movie is done well as well too. One thing that I had a big problem with Redstone was that I felt like the cinematography and the color palette just didn't really work for me for that film. Whereas in this movie, on the other hand, it's actually a lot better, in my opinion. But I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the scenery and the location that they have picked out to tell the story did work well with this film in terms of having to see a man who is pretty much more or less going through a redemption, but the backdrop kind of more or less fits that to understand the character's journey, because winter is the death of a season and then spring is more or less the birth of a season, if you will. And I think that this is the transition that he's coming through, because we're in Redstone, he's finally figuring out what he wants to do to get himself out of that situation of becoming a hitman. And then as he's leaving that is the death of that former life, if you will, if that makes any sense. And then in hoping that this film does well, and if we do get another sequel to this, or at least another film with this character, I'm assuming that that's going to also change as well too, to kind of showcase a different side of the character with a different backdrop to more or less fit the mood that they're going for in that potential film that they may hopefully be working on. But the point I'm getting at here is that I also feel that with the performances, the cinematography, the directing, the writing in this movie too, has gotten better, in my opinion. And I don't think that Derek Presley did a terrible job in directing Redstone, or didn't do a good job in writing Redstone. That's not what I'm trying to point out here. I think he did a really good job. Just certain things that were handled in certain sequences that just didn't flow as well as I thought they could have flowed, like they did in Whitetail, as they did here in Boon. I feel like what they had, I think didn't do very well, and they did much better in this film. So I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but I hope you understand where I'm coming from with all this here. So for me, this is going to be the end of my positives. So now let's get into my negatives. Now, my first negative with this movie, despite the fact that I just said that the film is paced very well and it's actually handled much better where you have more time to spend with the characters, I actually felt like the film could have been a bit longer to be able to flesh out more details about the characters, where I felt like there were certain sequences where it was a little too short, and because it was a little too short, certain things didn't flesh itself out as well as I thought it would, but I didn't have a major problem with it. I just felt like that more time would be needed to tell this story, especially for the character of Boon, where, not to necessarily tell more about his background, but I really want to see more of a side of the character where you see him in church and really kind of see that how he's internalizing all those emotions of what he's gone through, and having to deal with the actual process of having to walk away from the life, and how it works with him inside. And you get to see a bit of that, but it's definitely kind of mostly hinted at rather than you actually seeing that. And I think that might be done on purpose in that respect, but I honestly thought that would have been done more with this film. You get pieces of that, but not as much as I thought I would be seeing here in this movie. The other thing I want to point out about my negatives here with this film is that there is a federal agent in this movie who, again, the actor's name is escaping, but I'll have the image for you guys to see. I actually did like the character, but the way the character was used to a point worked effectively, but I felt it could have been handled more, because could have been handled a bit better, I meant to say. But I felt like that with what the character of this federal agent was trying to accomplish made a lot of sense, but the actor and the character that he's portraying in this movie, I think could have been much more useful in this film. I'm not trying to tell anybody what to do with it and what they should have done with the character, but I really do feel like that character was very pivotal in the movie, and he could have been used a lot more in the film. But again, I think a lot of it may have to do simply with timing, because I'm not sure how long the production was. I'm assuming it might have been like 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. I'm kind of guesstimating here. And it definitely had a lot more resources and more money to make this film, and it definitely shows on the screen. But the one thing that I felt like that didn't necessarily work as well in this movie in terms of the amount of characters that are in the film is that giving some more breathing room to allow certain characters to flesh their story out a little bit more, or flesh out their personality, if you will, even though we already know who they are. But I just wanted to get a little bit more of those moments, especially with the character Fitzgerald, played by Tommy Flanagan, where you learn about his son and what happened to his son. It sort of hinted at some things that occurred, that some people were involved. But despite the mystery behind that, and you do get moments where you see how it's affecting him and how he feels about that particular situation, I actually would like to see a little bit more out of him in that respect, because I felt like that was a very integral part of the movie to really get to know the character a little bit better. But because there are moments where he's just coming off as a complete dick and very careless in a lot of ways, obviously very cocky, and he's more or less really the villain. But I actually felt like the moments that you get to see Fitzgerald under those when he's more vulnerable, that to me was where he was at his strongest in terms of his performance. Not to say that Tommy Flanagan was not good in the film; he is very good in the movie. But I felt like those particular moments, in learning about the character's background and just seeing and reading his facial expression, his body language, I think to me that was much more interesting, and I wanted to see a little bit more of that for that character. The character of Christina Choa's character, her name escapes me right now, but her character in this movie I thought was unique as well. Unfortunately, although I did like the character, I did feel like her character wasn't as impactful as I thought Fitzgerald was, Tommy Flanagan's character, but she definitely was used very effectively to carry the narrative. I thought her performance was good as well, but somehow I didn't feel the impact that I thought that Tommy Flanagan had in the film in terms of his performance for the character, whereas Christina Ochoa's character, although she was great, I didn't really have that impact from her character. Not saying she's bad by any means, she was actually really good, but for me personally, I just didn't really connect with her character in that respect. As far as any other negatives are concerned, I'm trying to think off the top of my head here. I honestly don't know if there's any other negatives I can point out here without really getting into spoilers here, because the issues that I had in those particular areas in the film dealing with that's in the spoiler territory, they're more nitpicks for me rather than actual issues with the film in itself. So I'm not really going to go getting into that at all. I feel like that if you watch the film, you'll probably see for yourself and what I may be sort of hinting at in terms of how certain scenes were cut and how they moved from one scene to the next, that I didn't necessarily feel it worked well. I kind of want to see that. That's why I felt like the story could have been, the film should be a little bit longer to allow those transitions to work effectively from one scene to the next. So I think in that respect, that it kind of did hurt the film from cutting from one scene to the next, and boom, the next thing is happening kind of abruptly in a lot of ways. So I think in that respect, I think it could have been fleshed out a little bit more to allow more breathing room to see how one thing occurred with certain characters that moves into the next scene. So yeah, you have time to understand what really happened without having those missing gaps, if that makes any sense. So I'm hoping you understand where I'm coming from with that. But that was going to be the end of my negatives. So now let's get into my rating. I really did enjoy this movie. I truly, truly did. I don't think it's Muscular Puppy's best film, but from what I've seen so far, if I were to give a ranking more or less, Whitetail I think is their best film. I think Whitetail is a beautifully shot film. It's a very well directed movie, and the pacing is one of the things that I love about that film. And everyone's performance in that movie I thought was phenomenal. Everyone's performance in Boon and Redstone, to some degree, I would say, have done a really good job. And I think that with Derek and Jason Starr and everyone under Muscular Puppy and everyone who's involved with the film have done to accomplish in making a good film in Boon, I think they've done a really good job. I do think this is going to be an enjoyable film for a lot of people to watch. This definitely is more or less like a Western. Although it's a very short film, there are some slow moments in the film, but those slow moments are important to allow you to get to know the characters and understanding their background, and just really having the time to sit with them to truly understand where they're coming from and learn who they are as individuals. So I think they've done a really good job with that. And that's one of the things I think where Derek is at his strongest, to allow those moments to breathe, to let it to flesh itself out and truly get to know the characters, which is why I thought Whitetail was so good in that respect, that Boon definitely had improved on that I thought Redstone had lacked in to some degree. But again, more time I think would have helped made the story a little bit more, I wouldn't say better, but to truly let everything sink in more effectively. But I still enjoyed the film regardless. So for me, I would say this movie is Raise a Glass. And those are my thoughts on the film. If you have seen the movie, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to our channel. Make sure to share, like our videos, and hit the notification bell while you're down there. Follow us on our social media accounts. On Facebook, Nerds Rule the World, Instagram, New Release Wednesdays, and on Twitter at the NRW. And you can follow me on my social media accounts. On Instagram and Twitter, Mr. Rob Medina, and on Facebook, simply just Rob Medina. And I have a show on the channel called You're So Cool with Rob Medina, and you can follow the show's social media accounts on there as well. On Instagram, You're So Cool with Rob Medina, and on Twitter, You're So Cool WRM. And I thank you all very much for checking out this review. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and until next time, everybody, stay safe out there, and cheers.